So I know I don't really talk about this series much on this channel, but have y'all seen that new live action One Piece?
I didn't know there were so many pirates.
It's terrible.
I know, right? Where's my face?
It's kind of cool, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not the biggest One Piece fan, but I do enjoy reading the manga, and this new live action show has got me kind of interested in getting into the anime. But as I was watching, it made me think a bit. And I'm sure y'all know by now that whenever I get weird thoughts in my head about anime, I just have to make a video about it. Kind of like how a cat always has to chase whatever you dangle in front of them. Or how Skip Bayless always has to tweet out every ignorant sports opinion that pops into his head. In this case, I just have to bother y'all with some opinions on the contrast between the medium of live action film and the medium of animation. As the title of the video says, I do have some thoughts on which one is better, but it's not in the way you think, cause, you know, I just gotta clickbait a little bit. That's how it works on this site. Still like and subscribe though. So when we talk about live action film and animation, we're talking about two mediums that are nearly as old as each other with loads of history between them. The oldest surviving film we know of is Roundhay Garden Scene from 1888, and the oldest example of hand-drawn animation we know of came about 20 years later in the form of Phantasmagoria. Not too far apart in the grand scheme of things. So you got two mediums that essentially developed side by side, and yet one is taken much more seriously by mainstream audiences and critics. I'm sure y'all have heard the stereotypes of animation, you know, that it's lowbrow entertainment only meant for children and embarrassing adults like me. And these stereotypes get even worse for Japanese animation. So, like, why is that? Is there just something inherent to the medium of live action film that's just like so potent artistically that animation can't even hope to match it? Look. I'm just gonna say this straight up. As of right now, I don't think animation can even hold a candle to live action film in almost every category. Whether it's artistic creativity, storytelling, presentation, I think live action has a beat on all fronts. But hold on to that thought and watch the whole video, cause I'll explain myself, trust me. Obviously, the first thing to say is that it's just my opinion, but even some of the best 2D animation I've seen can't hit me the same way a good old traditional film can. And this is simply because of one reason, the human element. This is not a human being. This is not a human being. This definitely is not a human being. As close as an art style can get to mimicking what a human looks like, at the end of the day, that's not a real person on the screen. I know. Shocker. Believe it or not, real people don't look like this. And thank God that's the case. Because you don't have a real actor on the screen portraying the characters, you don't get the benefit of a nuanced performance. You don't get to see all the small facial tics, all those small human movements that we're so used to seeing real people in the real world do. These characters can look human, and when the budget allows it, they can even move and breathe like humans do, but someone like Naruto, for example, is just something someone drew on like a matte background. It's definitely possible to mimic the human element in animation, but it's difficult and still isn't quite the same as the real thing. That's why animation often uses exaggerated reactions to tell us what kind of emotions the characters are feeling, as opposed to live action where we don't have to recreate the human element because, I mean, we got a real person right there, right? I know Chris Pratt may seem like a fever dream creation, but unfortunately, he's real. This means that it's hard for animation to do certain kinds of subtle scenes where their normal exaggerated emotional techniques won't work. Because when you got a still sequence in animation, a lot of the times it ends up just looking like what it is, a flat 2D picture. Unless again, you have the time and budget to make it a little bit more lifelike. Look at this scene of Al Pacino playing Michael Corleone in The Godfather.
Tu mi capisci, no? Sei italiano come tuo padre? Tuo padre sta male. Quando tu sta meglio, diciamo di fare un riunione e mettiamo tutto a posto. Steve sta via, si deve finire.
It's just a slow zoom onto his face as he really doesn't do any big acting. Yet we, as human beings who can recognize what other humans are feeling, can tell exactly what he's thinking. There's not a lot of movement in the scene, and yet, because Pacino is a real person, he exists in the scene like a real person would. You see his eyes blink and flick around, you see his mouth slightly twitch. These are things you can do in animation, but they look exaggerated and deliberate as opposed to just something a human naturally does. Compare that to a similar animated scene in Neon Genesis Evangelion. Nothing is said, not a lot of movement, but we can still get a sense of the tension in the air and the dynamic between Rei and Asuka. Both of the examples I just showed are incredible iconic scenes, and yet the animated scene feels so different from the live action one. Asuka and Rei's faces are completely still, and we know this isn't because of a choice made by a real actor, but rather a choice made by whoever drew these characters. Now granted, a lot of the dramatic effect of the scene from The Godfather is accomplished through the use of sound and camera work, but I mean that's also something that could be done in animation. The difference is, one is real, and one isn't. Humans are empathetic creatures, right? We all share similar experiences as human beings, so when we see someone in a movie that looks and or acts like us, it helps us connect in a way that makes that work of art more meaningful. Even with a hyper-realistic art style, 2D animation is just not human. Unless you're rotoscoping or have someone in full mocap or something, that's just factually not a human being on the screen. This is not the real world we're looking at. It's the reason why even live action movies with heavy CGI can feel cold and sterile unless it's done really, really well. Again, animation can try to imitate this. It can vary by art style, right? Obviously this looks a little bit more human-like than say this. But at the end of the day, they're both just cartoonish interpretations of what a human being looks like. And it's that difference between life and the imitation of life that makes live action film the superior medium of art. Because as much as it may try, animation is hard pressed to recreate a moment like this. Alright, you're still watching, right? Now let me tell you why everything I just said is a whole bunch of nonsensical buffoonery. The human element isn't just something that we get from real living humans, it's an idea that we all have in our heads that we can translate into, well, anything. It's the reason people see human-like traits in animals. It's the reason why you can still relate to a book with no pictures in it, or why VTubers get more views than actual people. As weird as it sounds, I think the human element is something that can be created. And that's what animation does by exaggerating the emotions that we all feel in a way that can sometimes make them feel even more potent than in real life. Because animation's greatest strength is that it can do things that would be near impossible to do in reality. I mentioned before how animated characters don't look like how real people look, right? But they're supposed to not look realistic. They're cartoons, that's the beauty of it. Luffy's devil fruit powers are so interesting to watch on screen and to read about in the manga because they look cartoonish. The exaggerated movements and facial expressions are all intentional. It doesn't look real because it isn't real. In my opinion, the live action adaptation of One Piece perfectly captures everything about Luffy's character except this. But that's okay, because it can't and doesn't need to. Because I mean, look, the whole stretchy bit Luffy's got going on is inherently silly, right? That kind of stuff just doesn't translate well to live action. It's why most silver screen incarnations of Mr. Fantastic have bombed. So it's for that reason that I've always been apprehensive of the idea of a live action One Piece. You know, amongst other things, because like, I mean, how do you do a live action Brook? Leaning into the infinite possibilities of animation is what sets it apart from live action. After all, film and animation are visual mediums, so why wouldn't you want a canvas where the only limit is your imagination? And I guess how horribly overworked you want your animators to be. This is how animation recreates the human element. Instead of leaning into subtlety and realism, the best animation, in my opinion, takes advantage of the endless possibilities of the medium by showing us a cartoonish exaggeration of humanity. And I mean that in a good way, because sometimes blowing something up to cartoonish proportions can give us perspective that we might not be able to have in the real world. Here's a scene from Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann.
穴を掘るなら天をつく。墓穴掘っても掘り抜けて。突き抜けたなら俺の勝ち。
Over the top, right? It's cheesy, melodramatic, and definitely not what a normal person would do in real life unless they wanted to get shoved in a locker. And yet that's the point. Big speeches like this don't happen in real life, and they're definitely not accompanied by dramatic lighting and copies of yourself floating around in the background, none of that. It's an exaggerated perspective on a real life phenomenon that we all probably know well, the act of finding your resolve. I mean, we've all experienced this, even through something as simple as finally getting the energy to get up out of bed and get some work done. But none of us have experienced it like this. And that's what animation can give to us artistically that live action film can't. Again, for the most part. What it really is just different ends of a spectrum of conveying the human experience. On one hand, you have the grounded and realistic, and on the other hand, you have the fantastical and over the top. And the thing to note is that both animation and live action film can hit either end. But the final conclusion I'm coming to is that animation does the fantastical a bit better, and live action handles the groundedness a bit better. I know. What an earth-shattering revelation. Aren't you glad you stuck around for the whole video? Let me know what you think in the comments though. What does the medium of film lack artistically that animation can provide, and vice versa? Because I still stand by my statement earlier that live action is a bit ahead of the pack in terms of what it can provide artistically to us as opposed to animation. But again, that's all something that can be solved with time. All it takes is that one genius writer or director or cinematographer or animator or something to create a work of animation that can really be put up there side to side with some of the cinematic greats. We're already seeing it with some of those Spider-Verse movies, and of course a lot of new anime that's coming out these days. And you know, since this is a subjective thing, some people out there may think animation has already surpassed what live action is capable of. Who knows? Either way, I'll just end off by saying I really like the new live action One Piece. That's the video. Peace. Oh, how could I forget? Even though animation is all lines and drawings and weird CGI modeling, there is a human element to it, and that's voice acting. Luffy might not be a real person, but Mayumi Tanaka's voice is definitely real. It's why good voice acting can make or break an animated production. I mean, if you can't convey the human element through realistic movement and facial tics, you gotta do it with your voice. But then again, this is something you can do in live action too. It's why James Earl Jones was so successful as Darth Vader. I don't know, that just popped into my head. It's an interesting discussion to have. Let me know what you think.